Hey everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and with me is
Ray Christner.
And we have an interesting practice in action episode today, talking about something that's been coming up a lot in session. And I think it's not a new concept, but one that we maybe hesitate to get into. And it's this idea of accommodating and making sure that when we're talking about accommodations, we want it to be accurate with what it is that we're accommodating and making sure it actually works.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great topic. It's one I, oftentimes talk about when I do workshops about how sometimes when we think we're accommodating, we may be harming more than helping.
Yeah.
Where it's we think that taking the difficulty away is a good thing. And sometimes it is. Sometimes there's times that it's necessary. But maybe how do we think about it more strategically than to just throw this laundry list of accommodations? And, I oftentimes, working with schools and even in vocational settings, it's like there's 20 accommodations listed. That's just a random list that we're just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping something sticks, versus being that intentional idea of let's understand what we're trying to achieve. Let's try to understand what's the goal and what's reasonable to get there. And I think that's a big piece of it is what's a reasonable accommodation. But it's difficult.
And, I'm grateful that the way that you're framing that of like the potential harm that it can do. And I think it really has such a base in case conceptualization, like to, coming back on one of our, I think our most popular episodes, but it's popular for, it's such an important piece of, we want to tailor this to the actual person that we're working with. And, when we do have that, like, copy paste over accommodation list, it's a bit of a one size fits all. And so making sure when we're talking about this in an education setting, in a work setting, I also think there's, the informal accommodations that we make. I know my wife makes an accommodation for me where she will send me reminder texts throughout the day if I have to do something. It helps alleviate her anxiety. It helps me kind of be primed and a bit more successful. Right. And so that's an accommodation that functions as intended. I'm more likely to be successful. And I don't have to necessarily go and open up my to-do list. However, that maybe then has me missing other things that are on my to-do list. And so there's a risk inherent, and we need to make sure we're aware of both what is it providing, but also what are we potentially avoiding that might be important that we're working on.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And I love that you mentioned this idea of informal, because I think, I don't know, maybe all of us have accommodations in our life. Like, I mean, no matter what's going on, like my wife accommodates me all the time. And, and hopefully sometimes I do her as well, probably not as good as she does for me, but it's, I think that, it's interesting to think that there are times in things like relationships and even friendships where maybe we do need something adjusted to make it work. But again, I think it should be something that we really think through. Even think of parents, and I don't want to pick on parents, but there's a lot of times I've told parents like, hey, we're accommodating too much. Like, I get it. You don't want them to have difficulty. But there is some struggle that has to happen in progress. Like we need to have that together. But I get it. As a parent, I wanted to accommodate for my kids all the time, but it's finding that balance of what's enough that it's not distressful, but what is enough to create some distress tolerance that they have to learn that skill.
Absolutely. And, I think I'm not having necessarily the school meetings or the workplace meetings for the recommendations, but when I am talking with, clients or families, partners, and I really like to come back to developmental psychologist of Vygotsky and that concept of scaffolding and how important that is. Yeah. And when we have this target goal, how do we provide just enough scaffolding where they are needing to reach and stretch, but they can meet that goal? And so it shouldn't
Right.
really be a stagnant thing when we're talking about accommodations either. We should be assessing to ensure, is this still something that's important that we're utilizing? Or is it some almost, and not crazy about using the word a crutch, but I'm going to use that here of like, is it becoming a crutch that we're a bit too reliant on and familiar with, that we're then missing out on those opportunities to skill build or circumvent needing that entirely?
Yeah, I love the reference back to Vygotsky. Like that's what an elegant theory, that we don't realize how much we use it. I think in all aspects of life, we use it in education, we use it in therapy. But yeah, what a great kind of reference, because I think that's a great way to look at it. Is I, they shouldn't be stagnant. When I work to advocate for kids for special services, there's nothing more frustrating than I see the same accommodation that's occurred for 10 years of their education. And I go, well, there's no movement. Like if we're just doing that, we're really not skill building. And is that an injustice to some extent that we're not giving them the skill? And listen, maybe we hit a plateau and that can happen. I mean, but I still think we should kind of figure out how do we work. And I think approaching it from scaffolding is a great way to do it. I mean, anybody that's had kids, you've scaffold for your kids all the time, you know?
I mean, hopefully we're moving out of potty training phase. Like,
Right.
like we make an accommodation for our, hey,
Right.
you're not capable of using the bathroom independently. But when you are, I really shouldn't still be a part of that process.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think that, but I think thinking of it in that way is important, and it helps us get to this kind of goodness of fit to some extent. And, it's, how do we find the right one at the right moment?
Yeah. And I think to do that, we almost need to look at the spectrum of what are over accommodations and what are under accommodations in a way. And then in some ways, I'll talk about this a lot in sessions. Let's reduce first before we start to explore. And, let's take away some of those, like, what are the things we know are over accommodate? We have the skill. It's not necessary. It's just like, it would just be performative and not really serving a value. But what are under accommodations? And like, what are those things where, and again, like we might look at that in a formal setting, and it might be, I'm expecting, this individual to be able to regulate their body without any, assistance whatsoever, and they should just be able to focus. And well, if they're not, like, okay, we might not be doing them a service. However, what does this fit here? Because my thought goes to similar, my younger stepdaughter, she's not old enough to drive. We have to accommodate her to be able to get her to certain locations and doing certain things. And so, if I'm like, well, figure it out. Like, I don't know that I want to figure it out.
She might.
That's a scary thing. Yeah. I don't know that that's a skill building I want to encourage. So we can, again, help guide and shape what skills are being built here. And so if it's, hey, communication, like, hey, we're leaving at this time. Are we then, are we on time for those types of things? So, even in that, we might not think of being, a dad taxi as an accommodation, but it truly is.
Right.
She's not able to be independent. She still has an obligation. So we need to look at this idea of, okay, me expecting her to get someplace without a ride, that's an under accommodate. Like, okay, so that's too much. If I were, helicoptering over her every moment, or that's too, that's previously too little, that's too much. What is a just right? So where are we seeing those struggles, and what's the step that we can take that lets them be successful? And maybe even there, like, if we take it a step back, what does that look like? And can they be successful still? If we take it a step forward, what does that look like? And finding that range where we're constantly developing and growing.
Yeah, I think that it's, when you're saying that, it reminds me of the concept of just task analysis, right? It's this, and I wasn't thinking of it necessarily in that way till you said it. And then I'm like, yeah, it's really kind of my process when I'm doing evaluations for someone that, let's say they're going to college and they need accommodations for maybe learning difficulty or attention problems. It's real easy to just at the end go, oh, they should have 100% extended time. Like they should double the time. But like, where do we get that number from? And is that just this excessive way to say, okay, good. I'll be honest, there's times my attention's not great. If I give myself 2 hours, I'll find ways to distract myself to take 2 hours. But if I give myself an hour and 10 minutes and I kind of just find that sweet spot, it both gives me enough time, but it also challenges me enough to push harder. And, we've talked about, executive functions and all these things. And, I think that's where we have to go back and go, hey, what's really reasonable? Like just throwing out 50% or 100% extended time doesn't do justice for someone. But to say, okay, how much longer do you need? And let's put a reasonable cap where it's going to push you to stay focused as much as you can. And I think research has panned that out. I mean, I pick on extended time all the time because I say it's a wonderful thing, but it is oftentimes it'll cause more problems. Anxiety's another example for that, right? We'll say, oh, you should have extended time on tests. Based on what? Like, how do we determine that? Because I have also worked with people who that extended time doesn't relieve their anxiety. It actually gives them more time to worry and overthink. They change their answers and they do worse than they would have done if they just through it. And so it is this, I think this idea of thinking of it from what is the under accommodation? What is the over accommodation? And where do we fit just right in the middle? It's, I think that idea is, it's important and it makes it that we're now personalizing somebody, which, is again, and I find that when we do laundry lists and there's just these generic ones, they're not really that effective. I mean, I have people who go, oh yeah, I have them, but no one really uses it. So if we personalize it and we make it not even a goodness of fit per accommodation, but how many accommodations are reasonable for us to have the best outcome goal-wise? We have 20. We're not even going to remember what they are. We have 5 good ones. Different story.
And I think that's another important piece, like your term reasonable accommodation, reasonable in terms of fit for the individual who's receiving the accommodation, but also reasonable in terms of the institution or the individuals who are providing that accommodation. And I don't think it was when we had him on the podcast, but I think it was a training I was watching for Ari Tuckman, and he talked about one of his favorite accommodations when it comes to test like the timing. And he said, if we can allow for there to be the same amount of time, but the time is only subtracted when we're on task.
Right.
So we could functionally take much longer. However, when we're attending, like when we're looking and we're engaging in the problem, that's when the timer is ticking down. So we have the same, usable time. And that is such a cool idea. That would be so hard to implement unless we have one-on-one, someone there with a stopwatch that can kind of monitor that for us, or maybe some advanced
a whole
AI
different
algorithm.
Stress, right?
Yeah, and so reasonable accommodation both for the accommodator as well as the accommodee, and making sure that something that can be done and reproduced, because we don't want to set up this wonderful accommodation and we're able to do it 1 or 2 times, but the effort it takes for the outcome it produces just isn't feasible for us to maintain. Right. So, and I think that sometimes happens when you have that laundry list of there's too much, and then it ends up with a net loss in a way.
So I love this example you gave from Ari Tuckman. What a great example. And let's stay with that for a second, because in how you worded it, it's unreasonable. There's just no way you can do it. Makes sense to me. But I look at it as maybe that's not where we should stop. I think we should say, okay, that is an unrealistic, maybe we'll call it a over accommodation. I don't know where it fits, but how do we bring it to the middle? How do we make it a goodness of fit? So as you're talking, I'm in my head, I'm going, okay, this was what somebody said they wanted to do. How could we do that? Well, what if we would say, we're going to let you work in 15-minute increments, and then you're going to take a 5-minute break. And those 15-minute increments that you're working, those are going to equal 90 minutes So I'm just making up a number. And we're not going to count those 5 minutes. So if you need that amount of time, that's what you're going to get, no matter if the whole class gets an hour. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we could set a phone alarm for that. There's a million ways we can do it. And we accomplish a way, but I think that's where we have to be intentional. We have to say, no, how long do you think you can pay attention? Right. So Pomodoro would tell us 25 minutes, right? But maybe not. Maybe for a 9-year-old, that's not realistic. And maybe it's 15 minutes. But we can take something I think that sounds unreasonable and find a way to get it to fit. I mean, how would you do it differently? Or
my thought was adapting the Pomodoro technique as a way of providing that support. And so we have it structured built in unproductive or like non-on task time. And I would even maybe add in, 4 minutes of downtime and a 1 minute re-engagement time. And so that way, when we're getting re-engaged for that, we're not being penalized to pick up that and kind of getting back up to pace. And I don't know, the weird metaphor that comes to mind is, I don't know if you've ever been on a highway exit that makes you stop and then you have to get up to speed versus a yield. And you have this nice long entryway of like, how do we have that nice long entryway that we can then merge in seamlessly rather than, feeling like we have to, merge in dangerously. And it's like, oh, I'm getting thrown back into that. So finding, again, different ways of, what's the fit and what's the need. And that time maybe extending out as the child's getting older.
Right.
And also, is that a skill that they're working to build? Am I working to expand my time on task attention? Because if that's the case, we shouldn't then be taking that stretch goal of what we're working towards. We should be taking that middling range where we already have success, because we're not being tested on how well we can pay attention. We're being tested on the material that the test is on.
I mean, I think that is just such a great example of where we take this vague concept and this just generic recommendation and say, yeah, we can personalize it. And not only that, just reiterating what you said, maybe we add minutes to the time. So now we're not only accommodating, we're building a tolerance for attention. We're building an ability to sustain. And listen, realistically, maybe someone doesn't get there. Maybe just neurobiologically they're not going to go. That doesn't mean we don't continue to try to expand that. And I would say that most people I've worked with, we've been able to see some growth in that. I do think we hit a peak. I think we get, but again, what do we know research-wise? 25 minutes is about what most of us pay attention. Like without ADHD or an attention problem of some sorts, we may reset faster. So, but we still distract. Like I did a experiment one time with a doctoral class that I was teaching, and we took out our cell phones and we put a stopwatch on. And through my lecture, I told them every time you have a thought or a distraction that's not related to the brilliance that I'm teaching you, I want you to hit the lap button. And so you can lap 50 times if you want on these phones now, right? So they sat there and they did it. Well, lo and behold, when we looked at the times, 20 to 25 minutes, somebody had a thought of something. They got distracted. Now, most of them, that lasted 5 seconds. They recovered and they went back. But can we accommodate to help build that intuitive skill for other people? I think we do. I think that's a great way to look at it.
And I think that takes that specific focus and the willingness to really, I think, defining an accommodation well and recognizing, again, what is that too much and what is that too little range? And I guess I'm going to kind of maybe talk a little bit about what it looks like and at least what I see in terms of like when we're talking about someone who's, if we're saying like under accommodated and certainly, the thought that comes to mind is if I'm having a conversation with a parent talking about, hey, here's where I'd like to go with executive functioning, maybe like skill building and I'm talking more in the jargon and I've already sent the parent some documentation. So I'm referencing that and they are just, well, like they're probably also bored, not interested, but like it's not, one of my questions I almost always ask after that was like, how much of that were you paying attention to? And if you say none, that's fine. And it's most of it, not at all, or like a little bit, or like, when you said this, it was.
Right.
So it's just like, okay, that attention was not there. So I then need to find a different way of presenting that same information. So if we're looking for shutdown, disengagement, like just that feeling of like, or it's like, well, what's the point? Like I don't feel like I belong, or I don't feel like I can even approach this to be successful. And again, maybe somewhere more of those informal settings. Like I was talking with someone earlier this week when we're talking about she wants to clean her house, and there's a lot of clutter, a lot of disorganization. And she talks about it's just so much. And like, I can't do that. So, it's that feeling of shutting down and not being able to. And we talk about putting in some of these interventions. And in some ways, the interventions are, she's accommodating for herself, or she's creating accommodations within her household that fit well. So instead of me putting this pressure of I'm getting it all clean in this weekend, it's okay. I'm setting, talking with my significant other or with my children. Yeah. Here's what we're going to be able to do. We're not going to be able to do all of it, but let's set a reasonable expectation, and that's what we're going to go with. And, if we're successful, that's wonderful, but it's not then this insurmountable task or this insurmountable piece. So even we're kind of accommodating expectations at that point.
Right. And I think, let's stay with the under accommodating piece, because I think, what do we also see, and how is under accommodation? And I think it's something we have to kind of, again, pay attention to, especially if we're working with kids. Like I tell parents, I'm like, frustration's communication. Like, I mean, we may not like it. We may not like the way they communicate, but I don't know. I've done this enough years. I don't know that I've met many kids that really want to have outbursts. Like, I don't think they go like, oh, like this is what I want to do today. Like no. It's a reaction to a stressor. And I think like if we're looking for signs of under accommodation, maybe we see frustration. Maybe we see zoning out. Again, I'm saying kids, but even adults. I've had, spouses that I've worked with where I said, well, what do you see at those moments? Oh, yeah. She zones out and doesn't even listen to me, doesn't hear a word. Okay. So then how do we start there? And we say, this is a situation where an under accommodation might happen. And I might not use that word, but then how do we back that up? And how do we catch it so that we, again, let's find the sweet spot. Let's find that place that we can put something in place before it gets there. And if a kid's having an outburst, the same thing, whether it's an accommodation for a sensory issue or whatever it might be. Again, we're not trying to eliminate the situation, but can we back it up? So I think we have to listen to that frustration, maybe the arguing, the anxiety might go up, the panic might go up, and again, kind of backing it down. Because again, it's not just taking it away. I think then we're going to go into the other end of it.
Yeah. So, well, and maybe kind of jumping into that, like taking it away, I think maybe over accommodating. I think it looks like, stagnation. It turns into this like almost the dependency where I'm expecting this and this is what I'm needing to be successful. And at times, if it's a good accommodation, that might be true, but we need to be willing to test that. We need to be willing to kind of say, okay, like, well, what happens? And like being willing to take that risk of, okay, this might not go as smooth. And again, that tolerating distress, tolerating discomfort, and being able to say, okay, is it still a stretch? Like, is it feeling like something? So when it's just that too easy, and again, like going back to the scaffolding comment, my whiteboard has probably an imprint for how many times I draw this, like the idea of a building, and then I'll draw a scaffold that's halfway down. I'll draw a scaffold that's, level with the building. I was like, this is this is too much. It's just that we can walk straight over. There's no effort that's needed.
Right.
And, we're elevating, they're successful off of our actions, not off their own. And I think that's a big piece of that. Like if we're over accommodating and doing the work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I say all the time, schoolwork should be hard. Our jobs should be at times hard. That doesn't mean they should be completely distressful, but there should be a challenge. A challenge is good. It's a good thing to have. I like that idea of like, yeah, if it's too smooth, if we're not having any reaction, then yeah, that's probably not a good place to be. And then we don't see growth. I mean,
Yeah.
in fact, you know, I don't know if it's even stagnation. I think we can potentially see regression.
That atrophy, the skill atrophy piece
Yeah,
of that.
right. Yeah. I mean, I think right. It's an atrophy. Yeah. That's a great way to look at it, is that we might see a backslide. And we see that with anxiety. If we over accommodate it and we don't challenge it, it will get worse. And listen, it's terrible to have to challenge it, but building that tolerance to stress, that the stress tolerance, I think, such a key. And again, finding where it's the right spot. I find, I don't know if you do, I find that when we do find the right kind of fit for an accommodation of sorts, we I think it motivates people to do more. Like it is that kind of self-efficacy. Like,
Yeah.
I did this. Like it feels good. Like, I mean, I feel good when I accomplish those things. So it gives us a way to really kind of set that goal. And then it continues the progress versus shutting it down.
And that ownership that comes along with it.
Sure.
This is my success. This isn't someone else. This isn't, they did the homework for me, or I just got the free pass. I worked damn hard and I'm proud of what I've done. And I've been able to be successful there. And so I had a very similar conversation earlier today where a client was able to go and advocate for themselves, for their supervisor, to say, hey, working 6 days on is too much for me right now. I'm like, I just not going to be, I've tried, I've been doing it for a few months. I'm burnt out. And this is like, we need to make a change. And the change wasn't a change in how many hours are being worked. It's a change in the way that the schedule is being formatted. So same hours, just a different process. And now, and she there's a lot of anxiety advocating for herself. And so there's so many different successes. And just like, I was really into like, you did this, we talked about it and planned, you talked about it with your parents and helped to plan. But that support, like that brainstorming, like that's, maybe in some ways an accommodate, you didn't have to do it all on your own, but you did this, and this was your effort that brought that success. Yeah.
And it's super important. I have, I've always been a fan of Ross Greene. I think he's formerly at Yale, but he I think got famous for the book The Explosive Child, and then he's written some other books, and I think has podcasts somewhere out there. But he with parenting, he talks about this idea of collaborative problem solving, and I actually kind of taken that and I expanded even in this world of accommodations, in that there's he talks about these baskets. So there's on one end, there's basket A, and basket A is, from a parenting standpoint, something that you will have a consequence for no matter what you do. So there's just a response to that. Basket C is, we just ignore it. It's just not worth the fight. Why are we wasting time on it, kind of deal. And basket B in the middle is the one that we collaborate with to come up with solutions for growth. So executive functions, some of his books talk about it that way. I kind of use that same mentality when I talk about accommodations, where I say, okay, what are the things that just are always going to have to be in place? Like, there are some things that, we may want to grow. We may want to try to challenge ourselves. Probably just not going to happen. Like, it's just that they're going to be too hard. What are things that, although I want them, probably don't need them? I would like them. They'd make me feel better. But okay, too much. And then what's the ones in the middle that we need support from those around us, and where we may need that new work schedule? We may need, where it's, hey, I'm not asking for less hours. I just need to modify how those hours look. That's the problem solving piece of it. And I think we should approach accommodations that way and look at it as, I think there's always some that fit in all of them. And
Yeah.
most people, I'll say, like, do you really, and you want it, but do you really need to have that accommodation? Like, is it something? And they'll go, no, like it's probably not. But, and that's okay. That's great. Like I love that they're willing to challenge it. And then when they get through it, it does feel good. Now, I've had times that we think that, and then they come back and they go, okay, I thought I could push through this one. We got to do something. Like, this is getting too much. I had a young guy just this year who went to college, and he said, initially I didn't want a roommate. He was like, I just need to be by myself. And I said, but is that a want or is it a need? Like, let's look at it from that way. And he goes, oh, you stay with my brother. Okay, it's probably really, it's something I really want more than I need. I'm like, give it a shot. Well, we got mid-semester, and he was like, can't concentrate. The roommate's noisy. It didn't work as we planned. I thought it was still a success.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm like, hey, listen, this is great. You really pushed yourself to try it. Now, what do you think we can do to change it? Now, I thought for sure he was going to be like, I just want to live by myself. I want a single room. And he said, I think it's just not the right roommate. I think I want to talk about a roommate change, but I would like to talk with the school about if I could, like, kind of give kind of my preferences and try to be matched with someone. It's pretty reasonable. I was
Absolutely.
like, and I told him, I was like, gosh, I'm so impressed. I'm like, to be honest, I would have probably wrote you a letter to have an individual room. Like, we could do that. And he goes, well, but is that for the best? He's like, listen, I actually kind of like living with someone. I'm not lonely. But I got a guy that's just noisy. He likes to study till 3:00 in the morning. The light's on. I can't sleep. Then I'm tired. Then I'm irritable. So it's just not working in that way. Wow. Okay. That's pretty cool. That's a good way to think about it. And so I think that if we do more conversations like that, we find, and I guess the end of the story, found a good roommate, ended up finding somebody connected with, I would say even maybe is going to probably be at least a friend throughout college. Like, he's like, oh, I'm going to stay with him next year. This was really a good fit. Man, we would have never known if we didn't try it.
And the importance of challenging that initial like almost all or nothing reaction of, it's either, it's going to be an awful roommate or it's no roommate. And we find a middle ground in that exploration, finding a much better fit. And I think that's the nuance of this, what's the just right way that we view accommodations. And I don't know about you, but oftentimes accompanying this conversation, I talk about the zones of comfort.
Yeah. And great. Yeah.
Great. There's a visual that I really love. It's just 3 concentric circles, and the idea of the comfort zone, the growth zone, and the panic zone, and there's a lot of different names for that. But just how do we constantly strive for that growth zone? Because that growth zone eventually becomes the comfort zone, and that when it does, now then we're expanding even more. And what was panic is now a stretch goal, and we can reach for that. And just that's the growth process that we're looking for. That's the skill building in these different areas. And usually when I'm pairing that with my, bad stick figure drawing of a scaffolding, and like, there's more willingness to buy into, like, okay, let me challenge that want, and that want that I'm kind of maybe initially grasping on as a need. And I think if we can untangle or like loosen that grip, that really gives us this range where we can find that, again, the Goldilocks of just right. Far easier.
Yeah. That's a good kind of model to kind of do. I don't think I've ever necessarily used that with it, but I do it in a different way, but it accomplishes the same thing. I think that is really a great way to look at it. And it then ties it back to what is really the goal for the individual. And I think we have to, again, kind of go, whether it's school or work or college or relationship, what is it that you really want to accomplish by having the accommodation? And gosh, as we're sitting here talking, I have like 100 examples in my head, of just good ways that we've profound goodness of fit. And even for really, difficult situations, I had an opportunity to work with a young guy who was autistic, and they wanted him to, the goal was to have him spend time in regular education. Great goal. He wanted to, parents wanted to, but the demand avoidance aspect kept kicking in. So as simple as the initial plan that was in place was the accommodation was you have to stay in the classroom for 10 minutes, and then you can go out for a 2-minute break. And you go 10 minutes. Sounds reasonable. It didn't change behavior. What it did was demand avoidance wasn't, well, he just didn't do anything. He waited out the time, and the 10 minutes hit, and he got to take a break. And his parents brilliantly were like, we need to change the accommodation. Time is not working. Instead, I think we should say, here are the 3 things you're going to do. And when you do them and you do them well, then you're going to be able to take a 5-minute break. So let's even up the ante. Let's give them a little longer time, but we're going to get 3 pieces of work done. Or even if we did 2 pieces. And I went, wow, that's really good. Our time doesn't work. He can sit and wait it out, and he still gets the break. We want action. We want him to participate. And man, I give those parents credit. I was like, that's a really good idea. Now we're holding him accountable. We're still meeting his need. We're accommodating it. We're getting him out of a situation that's stressful, but we're also getting some work. Little bit of a rough start. What a wonderful outcome, though. So again, it's not that we don't, it's too easy to abandon and go, well, it's not working. The problem solving piece of the parents to present that and say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's not abandon it. We think he needs breaks. We want this as our goal. What's the next logical step? And the next logical step worked. Maybe it wouldn't, and we would have had to go to the next one and the next one. Part of this is experimental.
Really, I think identifying good accommodations is just good problem solving skills.
Yeah.
Like, right. And that's as we're talking about this, I'm like, it's very reminiscent of our problem solving conversation. And like, I do think, thankfully, we have a different angle here of providing support versus just engaging in problem solving independently or for ourselves. But this idea of when we are looking for different things to work, we don't want it to work too well that we're reducing the need, or we need to make sure that's never going to be, a need again, in a sense.
Well, and I think it goes, I guess if we're going to give kind of the moral to the episode is let's get away from just generic accommodations that have no meaning, right? Let's tie them to a goal. Let's tie them to an outcome. And it's okay. Like, I gave the example of the guy who did the college roommate. Great. I've had equally a number of people who went, I'm not ready to go there. I can't do that. I need to decompress. And we were never going to challenge that as an accommodation. The right fit for them was to have a room by themselves. And their social time was going to be outside of their room, but they needed a place to go back to. So there's no, it's easy to go, well, everybody should just be able to have their single room, or everybody should challenge themselves. No, I think it's so individual. So we do, we problem solve, we think about it. We test and don't be afraid to fail. I mean, it's okay if it doesn't work, and then we adjust it.
And maybe one last piece to this, as clinicians, not being afraid to push, and I know personally, and kind of, I think even at the top of the episode called out, a part of why I wanted to talk about this is because earlier on in my career, even like at times met with newer circumstances where it's like, oh, I don't know that I want to push on this, right? Like, I don't know that I want to challenge this, and especially when we're talking about like, oh, I need this, or this is the only way I can be successful. And it's like, is it really? And that worry or fear of, am I going to upset someone, or am I over empathizing with their suffering in a way that then says, I know what that was. So I don't even no, I need to make sure that what's the function and fit for them? Are they growing? And, do they view that sense of growth? Are they experiencing that success? Or is it again, let's look for those determining markers there. Are we shutting down, or are we kind of stagnating and, it feeling almost this dependency piece to it?
Oh, and I think that goes a little bit back to, we can't do this the first time we meet someone. Like, I think it does. We do have to have a relationship to challenge sometimes, have a safe space to challenge. I tell people I'm okay if they disagree with me. We have to disagree appropriately, but we can disagree, challenge me and go, no, I think you're wrong. I think this is really what I need. It's not about want, but let's at least have a dialogue. And I think that really is the key, but it's hard. And I think I find that as I've gotten, I guess, more seasoned, technology has made it harder. Like, because I'll have somebody who will come in and say, well, TikTok said, or somebody on TikTok said, this is what I need. Maybe. I mean, let's not assume. Let's really talk about it. And sometimes it's the right thing, and other times it's not. But it would be too easy to just affirm, yeah, this is it. And do we then miss the opportunity to have some kind of Socratic dialogue with people and break it down and really think through it? And man, when we do that, I think it's so powerful. Not easy. And look, I've had people who, they've been upset, and I say, I get it, but we have to do a balance of, you have to feel heard, but I also have to be honest. Like, there's and I think I've said this in other episodes, I often say our time together is one of hope and one of honesty. And they may not work together all the time, because some of what I'm going to be honest about will create some good hope down the line. But the things that you hope that happen may not be my honest response. And there's that piece. But when we get there, I think that the opportunities to find, the Goldilocks moment, I think you called it. I think that.
And, I'm hoping that, for you listening, able to really think about, the accommodations that you are helping to support, those that you're working with, or those accommodations that are in your life, or that you're accommodating for others in your life. Just take a moment to assess, making sure it serves a purpose, and potentially be willing to make some adjustments if it's not. When, if you try it out and it turns out it is a great accommodation, like that college student, okay, that's
wonderful.
Yeah, right? It's great information. Right. But we'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, stay psyched.